The helicopters landed without warning. Two Blackhawks touched down on the roof of Harlow General Medical Center at 11:47 p.m., rotors still spinning, armed operators pouring out before the skids fully settled. They moved fast, through stairwells, past terrified nurses, past doctors frozen mid-sentence, until they reached the emergency department floor and stopped. Every weapon in the room pointed at one woman. She was standing beside a medication cart in faded blue scrubs, a pen tucked behind her ear, a half-eaten granola bar in her coat pocket. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She just looked at the lead operator and said, "You're 17 minutes late." If you want to know why a room full of armed soldiers stopped for a tired nurse on a Tuesday night, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and don't go anywhere because this story is only getting started. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it really began. Tjant. The first thing you noticed about Nora Slade was that nobody noticed her at all. That was partly by design. She kept her hair pulled back in a way that wasn't stylish or intentional, just practical. Out of her face, clipped with whatever she'd grabbed from the bathroom drawer that morning. Her scrubs were always clean, but never new. She moved through the hallways of Harlow General Medical Center with the kind of efficiency that registered as invisible. Not slow enough to draw complaints, not fast enough to draw attention. She had a way of arriving exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what needed doing, and disappearing again before anyone thought to ask her name. She was 36 years old. She had worked the emergency department at Harlow General for 4 years, and in those 4 years she had been talked over in meetings, left off email chains, handed the worst shifts on the rotation without explanation, and told, more than once in ways that ranged from blunt to almost apologetic, that her input wasn't really what the team needed right now. The hospital sat in the mid-sized city of Caldwell, a place that had once been a rail hub and had since become the kind of town that felt perpetually between things. Not quite struggling, not quite thriving. Harlow General served about 400 beds, ran a level 2 trauma center, and had recently undergone a renovation that gave it glass walls and a new administrative wing that the hospital director, Dr. Preston Hale, used for every press photo opportunity available to him. Dr. Hale was 52, silver-haired, and so accustomed to deference that he'd stopped recognizing it as a behavior and simply processed it as the natural order of things. He wasn't cruel in the way that required effort. He was dismissive in the way that required none, the way a person waves away a fly without breaking eye contact with whoever they're actually talking to. He had dismissed Nora 11 times in the past 18 months. She had counted. The first time was over a supply chain issue. She'd flagged an irregularity in how controlled substances were being logged. Small discrepancies, the kind that individually meant nothing but collectively suggested either a clerical failure or something worse. She brought it to the charge nurse, who brought it to administration. Dr. Hale had looked at her report for approximately 4 seconds before handing it back. "We have a compliance team for this," he said. "That's what they're here for." "The compliance team signed off on the logs," Nora said. He had already looked away. The second time was over a personnel matter she wasn't technically supposed to raise, but raised anyway because she'd seen the pattern. The third was a security concern. The fourth, another security concern. By the fifth, Dr. Hale stopped even taking her written submissions from her hand directly. His assistant collected them, slid them into a folder, and Nora never heard about them again. She learned to stop expecting acknowledgement. That was its own kind of discipline. What she did not stop doing was noticing. Noticing was not a choice she made. It was the way her brain had been trained to work during 8 years she didn't discuss with anyone at Harlow General. Before the scrubs, before Caldwell, before the quiet life she had assembled around herself like a series of careful walls, Nora Slade had been a combat medic assigned to a special operations support unit. Not the kind of work that appeared on public records. Not the kind of career that came with a LinkedIn page or a framed commendation you hung in your hallway. The kind of work where you spent 3 years learning to read environments before you entered them. Where you cataloged exits automatically. Where a detail out of place, a shadow at the wrong angle, a vehicle parked too long, a face you'd seen twice in different contexts, was the difference between completing the mission and not coming home. She had left that world under circumstances she did not volunteer and others did not fully understand. Her separation papers said one thing. The people who had actually been there knew something different. Nora had never fought the record. She had simply moved on, or tried to. The Tuesday it changed started like every other Tuesday. She came in at 6:45 for a 7 o'clock shift, changed in the locker room, pulled her hair back with a blue clip she found in her jacket pocket, and picked up the handoff notes from the overnight team. The ER was mid-volume, not slammed, not quiet, the kind of rhythm that required steady attention without demanding anything dramatic. 3 chest pains, 1 pediatric respiratory, 2 traumas from a highway incident, a psychiatric hold in room 7 who'd been waiting since 4 in the morning. She moved through her assignments with the same efficiency that made her invisible, checked vitals, adjusted a drip, listened to an elderly man describe his symptoms for the 4th time because he was frightened and repetition was how he managed fear. She sat with him for 6 minutes longer than the chart required, because that was also part of the job, even if nobody recorded it. At 9:15, she noticed the first thing that didn't belong. The security camera at the junction between the administrative corridor and the East Wing loading dock had been repositioned. It wasn't obvious. The housing looked identical, the indicator light was still green, but the angle was off by about 12 degrees. She knew the angle because she had walked that corridor 400 times, and the camera had always caught the left wall of the access panel when you passed it. Now it caught the right. Somebody had moved it. She filed a mental note and kept moving. At 10:40, a maintenance worker she didn't recognize appeared near the restricted corridor on the 2nd floor. Harlow General used a contract service for facilities. The faces rotated, so unfamiliar wasn't automatically suspicious. But this man was moving wrong, not the slow, deliberate movement of someone checking equipment or looking for a specific junction box. He was moving the way people moved when they were trying to look like they belonged somewhere they didn't, slightly too casual, eyes tracking a half-second too late, the way someone who'd rehearsed confidence walked when the rehearsal hadn't quite taken. He had a badge. She clocked the color, the font, the clip style. It was close to Harlow General's standard contractor badge, but the clip was wrong. The real ones had a horizontal ridge along the bottom edge. This one was smooth. She took out her phone and took 2 photographs. She didn't know yet why she was doing it. She only knew that the habit of documenting was older than any rational explanation she could offer. At noon, she went to Dr. Hale's office. His assistant, a young man named Marcus who treated every visitor with equal opportunity apology, looked up from his desk with an expression that said he already knew how this was going to go. "I need 5 minutes," Nora said. "He's in a prep meeting until 2. It's about a security issue in the building. I can wait." Marcus disappeared into the inner office. He was back in 90 seconds. "He said you can submit a written concern to facilities management." Nora looked at Marcus without moving her face. "Did you tell him it was time sensitive?" "He said the proper channel is facilities management." She walked away. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't even particularly angry anymore. Anger had been a phase she'd passed through somewhere in year 2, like a weather system moving east. What she felt now was a quieter and more durable thing. The cold certainty that if something was wrong in this building, she was going to have to handle it herself. She spent her lunch break in the stairwell at the north end of the building with her back to the wall and her phone in her hand, reviewing the photographs she'd taken. She ran the badge image against her memory of the standard credential. She mapped the camera displacement against the coverage grid she'd memorized without ever writing it down. She thought about the timing. Why now? Why this week? Then she remembered. Harlow General had issued a staff memo 3 days ago. Routine, buried in the weekly administrative update, the kind of communication that most of the staff absorbed the way they absorbed weather forecasts. A military medical liaison team was scheduled to conduct an on-site review of the hospital's trauma protocols in preparation for a potential defense contractor partnership. The visit was Friday, 4 days away. Senior military personnel, a classified review, and someone had just repositioned a security camera and sent a man with a fake badge into a restricted corridor. Nora sat in the stairwell for 3 more minutes. Then she opened a contact in her phone that had no name attached to it, just a 7-digit string she had memorized instead of typing, and sent a single image. She didn't write anything. 30 seconds later, the response came back. "Stand by." She clipped her phone to her waistband and went back to work. The afternoon moved slowly. She rotated through her patients, managed a difficult family situation in room 4, caught a medication dosage discrepancy that would have caused a serious interaction problem if anyone else had been reading the chart, and said nothing about it to anyone because making it a moment would have required explaining why she'd been cross-referencing drug interactions on a patient who wasn't technically hers. She fixed it quietly and moved on. At 4:30, Dr. Hale appeared in the ER bay. He was with 2 men she didn't recognize. Suits, not scrubs, not uniforms. The body language between the 3 of them was collaborative in the way of people who had come to an agreement recently and were still enjoying the warmth of it. Hale was doing most of the talking. The other 2 were listening in the way of people who needed to appear interested without committing to anything. She watched them for 40 seconds from across the floor. Neither of the men in suits looked like federal agents. They didn't have the practiced environmental awareness that field personnel carried, even when they were trying not to show it. They looked like consultants, private sector, the kind who got paid to be useful to several people at once. One of them caught her looking and looked back. She shifted her gaze to the monitor beside her and didn't look again. At 6:10, as she was coming off her shift and filling out her end-of-day notes, her phone buzzed. Not a text. A different kind of alert. A frequency she hadn't heard in 4 years, routed through an application that looked, to anyone glancing at her screen, like a weather app. The message was 11 words. Confirmed external interest in Friday event. One source inside the building. She read it twice. She turned off the screen. She finished her notes in handwriting that didn't change. Then she drove home, sat in her car in the parking structure for 6 minutes without moving, and thought about what it meant to have confirmation of something you'd already suspected. It meant the problem was real. It meant the proper channel had already failed. And it meant that whoever was inside this building, whatever they were planning, whatever the Friday visit actually meant to people who weren't in the staff memo, Nora Slade was now the only person in Harlow General Medical Center who understood what she was looking at. She went inside. She made coffee she didn't drink. She laid out everything she knew on the kitchen table without writing any of it down, because writing it down created evidence of a kind she wasn't ready to produce yet. She organized it in her head the way she'd been taught, not by urgency but by certainty. What she knew for certain, what she suspected, what she needed to verify. The camera displacement was certain, the badge irregularity was certain. The 2 men with Hale, suspected. The internal source, confirmed by someone whose confirmation she trusted more than her own instincts, which was a category that held almost no one. She went to bed at 10. She set no alarm. She didn't need one. She was back at the hospital at 5:50 the next morning. Not for her shift, that didn't start until 7. She came in early because there was a service entrance on the building's east side that she had flagged in a written report 14 months ago as having inadequate checkpoint protocol. The report had gone to facilities management. Nothing had changed. The entrance was staffed by a rotating contractor who checked employee badges with a scanner that she had confirmed by watching it for 3 separate mornings across 3 separate months had a 2 to 4 second lag between scan and verification, long enough for someone to follow through on a borrowed credential if they timed it right. She stood inside the north stairwell at 6:04 and watched the east entrance from a sightline that wasn't visible from the entrance itself. She had a cup of coffee from the machine on the ground floor. She drank it slowly. At 6:19, a man in a facilities uniform came through the east entrance. The contractor at the checkpoint scanned his badge. The lag was 3 seconds. The man walked through before the screen had fully populated. The man was not the same one she'd photographed the day before. He was older, broader. He moved with more assurance, not the rehearsed casualness of yesterday's visitor, but the actual confidence of someone who had done this specific thing multiple times and found it reliable. He turned left down the access corridor toward the mechanical systems room. Nora gave him 40 seconds. Then she followed. The mechanical room door was closed when she reached it. She put her hand flat on the surface, not touching the handle, just reading vibration. Nothing. She moved past it and took the service stairs to the 2nd floor, came around through the east wing, and descended again through a different access point that let her approach the mechanical room from the opposite direction. The man was standing outside the room. He'd come back out. He had his phone to his ear, and he was speaking in a low, unhurried way that suggested he wasn't worried about being overheard. She caught 4 words. Confirmed for the 15th. She kept walking. She didn't slow down. She turned the corner, kept her pace, and was 3 hallways away before she exhaled. Friday was the 15th. She reached the emergency department floor at 6:53, 7 minutes before her shift. The charge nurse, a capable woman named Denise who had worked Harlow General's ER for 11 years, and who had always treated Nora with the specific respect of someone who recognized competence without needing to analyze it, handed her the morning roster and gave her a look that said something was different today, without specifying what. Administration sent down a security briefing, Denise said, for the Friday visit. Apparently there's a protocol. When did this come through? An hour ago, Hale's office. Nora took the roster. Is it posted? Break room board. For whatever that's worth. Nora went to the break room, read the briefing in 45 seconds, and understood immediately that it had been written by someone who didn't know what they were protecting against. It covered visitor badge verification, photography restrictions, and a general reminder to direct media inquiries to the communications office. It said nothing about the east entrance, nothing about contractor protocols, nothing about the camera on the administrative corridor. It was the kind of document produced by someone performing security rather than practicing it. She folded the briefing and put it in her pocket. At 8:45, Dr. Hale came through the ER on what he called a floor walk, a bi-weekly ritual that served primarily to remind the staff of his existence. He moved through the department with his tablet under his arm and his practiced expression of engaged authority, pausing at intervals to ask questions he didn't actually need answered. He stopped near Nora's station. "How are we looking this morning?" he asked, addressing the space approximately 6 inches above her head. "I have a concern about the East Service entrance," she said. "The checkpoint protocol has a credential lag that I've documented before. Given the Friday, Nora." He said her name the way someone says anyway. "We have a security contractor handling the Friday preparations. They've done threat assessments for 3 Department of Defense sites this year. I think they have the entrances covered." "I watched someone come through this morning before the scan completed." He looked at her directly for the first time. "Did you report it to the security contractor?" "I don't have contact with the security contractor." "Then submit it to facilities management. That's the process." He was already moving. "We need everyone focused on patient care this week, not on theories." She watched him go. She turned back to her station. She checked the vitals on her monitor. She adjusted a notation in the chart in front of her. She did all of this with steady hands, because steady hands were something she had trained into herself across a decade and 4 years of conscious effort, and she wasn't going to stop now. Her phone buzzed at 9:02. The message was 3 words and a time. North Stairwell, 11:30. She was there at 11:28. The man who came through the stairwell door at exactly 11:30 was in civilian clothes. Dark jacket, no lanyard, no badge visible. He was maybe 40, lean in the way of someone who stayed that way through habit rather than vanity, with the kind of stillness in his eyes that Nora recognized immediately and hadn't seen in 4 years. He looked at her for 2 seconds without speaking. Then he said, "You reported the camera displacement and the credential irregularity." "Yes." "Before our team flagged either." She didn't answer that. "My name is Reeves," he said. "I'm attached to the security advance for Friday. I got your images." He paused. "The badge you photographed. We've been tracking the individual who produced it for 8 months. This is the 3rd facility he's approached in this region." Another pause. "The camera on the administrative corridor was repositioned to create a blind spot covering a 12-foot section of hallway that leads to the auxiliary communications junction." Nora processed that. "So someone in the building is helping them," she said. "The camera didn't move itself." Reeves looked at her steadily. "We have a short list," he said. "We don't have confirmation yet. The man I saw this morning, East Entrance 619, older, broad build, facilities uniform." Reeves's expression didn't change, but something shifted in it. "When you say you saw him, where were you positioned?" "North stairwell, sight line through the secondary fire door glass. I followed him to the mechanical room corridor. He made a call. I caught 4 words. Confirmed for the 15th. Reeves was quiet for a moment. "You did all of that," he said, "and then came in and started your shift." "My shift started at 7. He almost smiled. Not quite. There are people who have been on this for 8 months, he said, who didn't get what you just described in one morning. He pulled out a card with nothing printed on it, just a handwritten number. I need you to do something that's going to be difficult. What? I need you to keep working your shift. Don't change your routine. Don't report anything else through the hospital system. Don't talk to Hale. Don't talk to security. Don't talk to anyone. He held out the card. If you see anything, you send it to this number. Just the image or the detail. No explanation. She took the card. What's happening on Friday? She asked. Reeves studied her for a moment. The visit isn't a liaison review, he said. The individual arriving has a classified medical situation that required a civilian facility for reasons I'm not authorized to share. What I can tell you is that the people who reposition that camera know the real reason for the visit. He moved toward the door, which means someone inside this hospital told them. He pushed the door open. Get back to your patients, he said. And Nora, she looked at him. Whatever your file says, he said, I've seen your work. Don't let anyone in this building tell you what you are. The door closed. She stood in the stairwell alone for exactly 60 seconds. Then she went back to the ER floor, picked up the chart she'd left at her station, and kept working. By 3 in the afternoon, she had identified 2 more anomalies. A service request logged under a name that didn't appear in the staff directory, and a keycard access pattern in the system that showed the auxiliary communications junction had been accessed 4 times in the past 6 days, at hours when the building ran skeleton staff. She documented both on her personal phone and sent them without comment to the number on the card. The response came back in under 2 minutes both times. Received. That was all. She was walking to her car at 6:40 when she became aware of the footsteps behind her. Not threatening. No urgency, no closing speed, just present. She didn't turn around. She adjusted her route slightly, angling toward the better-lit section of the parking structure, and the footsteps adjusted with her. She stopped at her car. She turned around. The man in the facility's uniform from the east entrance was standing 15 feet away. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't moving. He was just looking at her with an expression that was almost curious, the look of someone recalibrating. Long shift? He said. Standard, she said. You're here early some mornings. She looked at him without moving her face. I like the parking, she said. He smiled. It didn't reach anything. Have a good night, he said. He turned and walked away. She got in her car. She locked the doors. She sat for 30 seconds without starting the engine, then started it, drove to the exit, and didn't look in the rearview mirror. She called the number from the card when she reached the first traffic light. It rang once. He made contact, she said. Parking structure 642. He knows my schedule. A pause on the other end. Are you safe? Yes. Drive somewhere public. Don't go home for 2 hours. Another pause. We're moving the timeline. Things are happening faster than we thought. She drove. The city passed outside her windows. The gas stations and the chain restaurants and the ordinary Tuesday night architecture of a place that had no idea what was sitting inside its hospital, waiting for Friday. Her hands were steady on the wheel. She turned at the next light and drove into the lit-up heart of Caldwell, and she was already thinking about the morning and the east entrance and the 12-foot blind spot in the corridor and the name that didn't appear in the staff directory and the 4 words she'd caught in a hallway that nobody had asked her to walk down. Confirmed for the 15th. 3 days. Show more. She drove for 90 minutes, not in circles. She had a route, loosely structured, taking her through the commercial district, then north along the river road where the streetlights were reliable and other cars were visible in both directions. She stopped at a diner on Mercer Street that she'd been to twice before, sat at the counter with her back to the wall and her eyes on the door, and ordered coffee she actually drank this time. The waitress didn't try to make conversation. Nora tipped well and left at 8:40. She went home at 9:05. She checked the exterior of her building before entering, a habit so old she no longer thought of it as a habit, just as the thing she did before opening a door. Nothing was wrong. She went inside, locked up, and sat on the edge of her bed with her phone in her hand and the card from Reeves on the nightstand. She didn't call again. He'd said he'd contact her. She had learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do when waiting for information was to reach for it before it was ready. You ended up with noise instead of signal, and noise got people killed. She slept 4 hours. It wasn't enough, and it was all she was going to get. Wednesday started gray, the sky low and close the way Caldwell's sky got in late fall when the weather couldn't commit to anything. She was at the hospital at 6:15, again before her shift, again in the north stairwell with a view of the east entrance. The same contractor was at the checkpoint. The lag on the scanner was the same. Nobody came through at the wrong time. But the mechanical room door, which she could partially see from her position, was ajar. It had been closed yesterday. She had tried the handle. Locked. Now the door sat open by maybe 2 inches, the dark interior visible as a thin vertical line. She gave it 4 minutes. Nobody came out. Nobody went in. She descended, walked the access corridor at a pace that suggested she had a destination, and went past the mechanical room without stopping. She used the 2-second window of her peripheral vision as she passed the gap. The room was empty. The door had been propped open with a folded piece of cardboard, the kind of thing you'd do if you needed to return and didn't want to bother with a key. Someone was planning to come back. She kept walking. She sent a single message to the number on the card. Mechanical room east corridor. Door propped. No occupant. Someone returning. The response took 4 minutes this time. Do not approach. We have eyes on it. She believed him. She went upstairs and started her shift. The morning was busy in the way that ER mornings sometimes were. Not with anything dramatic, just with volume, the steady accumulation of people who had waited until they couldn't wait anymore. She moved through it efficiently, which was the only way she knew how to move through it, and kept the mechanical room in the back of her mind as a frequency she was monitoring without tuning into directly. At 10:20, Denise appeared beside her at the medication station. Hale's doing an all-hands at noon, she said. Something about the Friday visit. New protocols. Mandatory. He said strongly encouraged, which means mandatory. Nora looked at the chart she was holding. What kind of protocols? Denise's expression said she'd already formed an opinion about this. Apparently there's going to be a military security team on the floor Friday morning. Hale wants everyone to know what to expect so nobody panics. She paused. He used the word panics. He thinks his staff is going to panic over military personnel. Denise confirmed. Nora went back to her chart. I'll be there. The all-hands was in the second-floor conference room, which fit about 40 people comfortably and had 63 in it by 12:05. Nora stood near the back, which gave her the door and the room both. Dr. Hale stood at the front with his tablet and his expression of managed authority, and beside him was a man in a gray suit who Nora had not seen before. Not Reeves. Different build, different posture. This one had the practiced ease of someone who spent a lot of time in rooms like this, being looked at, explaining things to people who needed reassurance more than information. This is Mr. Garrett, Hale said. He's the lead coordinator for Friday's security arrangements. He's going to walk you through what to expect. Garrett spoke for 8 minutes. He was smooth, thorough, and said almost nothing of substance, which was itself a kind of information. He talked about badge verification procedures and restricted zones and the importance of maintaining normal operations. He answered 3 questions from the staff, all of them logistical, all of them things he'd clearly been asked before. Nora watched him the way she'd watched the maintenance man in the parking lot. Not at his face, but at his edges, the small tells, the places where the practiced version of a person showed its seams. He was good. But when one of the ER techs asked about the east entrance specifically, not because she suspected anything, just because she used it every morning, something crossed Garrett's face in the space between hearing the question and beginning to answer it. It was less than a second. It might have been nothing. It wasn't nothing. The east entrance will be operating on standard protocol, Garrett said. No change to staff access. Nora turned that over in her mind on the way back downstairs. Standard protocol. No change. He hadn't said secured. He hadn't said enhanced verification. He'd said standard, which was the protocol she'd watched fail twice in 2 mornings. Either Garrett didn't know about the lag, or he knew and had decided it wasn't his problem, or he knew and had decided it served a purpose. She was still thinking about it when her phone buzzed at 1:47. Stairwell, 10 minutes. Reeves was already there when she arrived. He looked like he'd slept less than she had, which she found oddly reassuring. It meant the situation was moving fast enough that sleep had become a luxury. "The mechanical room," he said without preamble. "We had someone on it from 7 this morning. Nobody went back for the prop. At 10:50, a member of the facilities staff, legitimate employee, 7 years at this hospital, went in and removed the cardboard. Door relocked." Nora processed that. "He was cleaning it up," she said, "because whatever they needed to do in there was already done. That's our read." "What's in there?" "Junction box for the building's emergency communication system, the one that routes internal PA announcements and the overhead paging network." He let that sit for a moment. "If you interrupt that system at the right moment on Friday, you can create enough confusion to move people in directions they wouldn't otherwise go." "A crowd management tool," Nora said, "or a distraction." "For what?" Reeves looked at her steadily. "The individual arriving Friday is not a liaison officer. He's a senior intelligence official undergoing post-operative recovery after a classified procedure. The cover story, the liaison review, was put together specifically to obscure the nature of the visit." He paused. "Someone inside this hospital accessed the patient intake documentation before it was supposed to exist." The room was quiet except for the building's ventilation system. "Before it existed," Nora said. "The intake was drafted 4 days before the decision to use this facility was finalized. It was in a classified system. It was accessed from an internal terminal, not remotely, not through any external breach. Someone with physical access to this building reached it through a workstation." "Which workstation?" "Administrative wing, 3rd floor." He watched her. "Hale's floor." Nora didn't say anything. "We're not drawing conclusions," Reeves said, with the precision of someone drawing a conclusion they weren't yet prepared to state. "Who else has access to that floor after hours?" "That's what we're working on." He shifted his weight slightly. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing when I do." She waited. "Your name came up in the investigative review," he said. "Not as a subject, as a resource. Someone on the federal team ran your background, so the full background, not the employment file." He paused. "The separation from your service unit, the incident during the Corps' extraction." She kept her face still. "They know about the extraction," she said. "They know what actually happened, not the version in your file." He looked at her with something that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite respect, something in between, the kind of thing you offered someone when you understood what something had cost them. "I'm sorry it took this long for anyone to look at it correctly." "That's not what this is about right now," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded sheet. Not a card this time, an actual page with a building schematic printed on it. He held it up briefly, long enough for her to read the key points, and then refolded it. "I can't leave this with you, but I need you to know 2 things. First, the auxiliary communications junction feeds into a secondary routing panel on your floor, the ER level, behind the supply closet at the north end of the department." But she knew exactly where the supply closet was. "Second," he said, "if anything happens Friday that doesn't feel right, if something moves that shouldn't move, if an alarm sounds that doesn't match the situation, if you see anybody on that floor who doesn't belong, you don't call the hospital security line. You don't go to Hale. You call me directly." He held up his phone, showed her the number on screen long enough to confirm it matched the card. "Not the number on the card. My direct line, the one you just read." She committed it without writing it down. "What's my role?" she asked. "Friday. Officially. Officially, you're a nurse working a shift. And unofficially?" He folded the schematic back into his jacket. "You're the only person in this building who's already caught 2 things our advance team missed," he said. "I don't want you in a formal role because I don't want you visible. Visible means whoever is inside this operation knows where you are." He moved toward the door. "Stay invisible." She almost said, "I'm good at that." She didn't. She went back downstairs and worked the rest of the afternoon without incident, which felt wrong in the particular way that quiet felt wrong when you knew something was underneath it. She triaged, she charted, She managed a difficult handoff with the incoming evening team about a patient whose situation had shifted twice in 4 hours and whose family was making decisions based on the first version of events. She handled it. She always handled it. At 4:55, she was restocking the supply cart near the north end of the department when she looked at the supply closet door and thought about the secondary routing panel on the other side of it. She didn't open the door. Not yet. She went home, ate, and slept 6 hours. Better. Thursday was the day everything started fraying at the edges. She noticed it in the building's rhythm. Something slightly off in the way people were moving, the way conversations stopped half a beat too soon when she entered a room, the way Garrett appeared on the ER floor at 9:15 without any visible reason for being there. He walked the perimeter of the department with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes moving in a pattern she recognized as surveillance, and when he reached the north end near the supply closet, he paused. Not long. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then he turned and walked back the way he'd come. She was charting at her station and didn't look up from the screen. At 11, she got a message from Reeves that was longer than any previous communication. The legitimate staff member who cleared the mechanical room, name is Pollard, facilities team. We have him on camera accessing the admin terminal on Tuesday night at 2:17 a.m. He used his own credentials. He's not sophisticated enough to have done this independently. Someone gave him instructions and access to the classified system's location. We need to know who he's been in contact with inside the building. I'm sending you something. Check your email, the account you used when you first contacted us. She hadn't used that account in 4 years. She accessed it from her phone in the bathroom, on a network she trusted more than the hospital's. The attachment was a list of names, 14 people, internal contacts who had interacted with Pollard across the past 60 days, drawn from keycard records and facility work order logs. Most of them she didn't know. Maintenance, housekeeping, one person from dietary. 3 of them she knew. Denise, which was impossible. She trusted Denise with the kind of certainty that came from 4 years of watching someone make the right call under pressure. And you didn't fake that, not consistently. A physician named Dr. Arnav Seshu, who worked orthopedics and had no reason to be interacting with a facilities worker, except that he had apparently signed off on a work order in September for repairs to the orthopedic wing service corridor. And Marcus, Hale's assistant, who had, according to the keycard records, been in the administrative wing at 11:40 p.m. on Monday, 40 minutes before Pollard accessed the terminal. She stared at Marcus's name for a long moment. He was 24 years old. He brought Hale his coffee at the same time every morning. He said, "I'm sorry," before every piece of bad news, as if the apology could soften it. He had been at Harlow General for 2 years. She thought about the way he'd looked when she'd come to Hale's office on Tuesday. The apology in his face that she'd read as embarrassment on her behalf. Maybe it had been something else. She closed the account and went back to the floor. The afternoon deteriorated fast. At 1:30, a man she didn't recognize came into the ER, not through the ambulance bay, but through the main public entrance, which was unusual. Walk-in traffic went to the registration desk, not directly onto the floor. He was wearing a hospital bracelet. He looked disoriented, which in an ER was not remarkable, except that the bracelet was on his right wrist and hospital bracelets at Harlow General went on the left. Nora flagged the registration desk without moving from her position. "Man at the bay entrance, right wrist bracelet, he come through you?" The registration clerk looked. "No, never seen him." Nora crossed to him. He saw her coming and didn't step back, didn't step forward. "Can I help you?" she said. "Looking for radiology," he said. "Radiology is on the 3rd floor. This is the emergency department." I must have gotten confused. He was not confused. His eyes were tracking the room with the same careful inventory she'd seen in the parking lot, but he was better than the man in the facilities uniform. Faster, more practiced, the disorientation a cleaner performance. "Let me take you to the elevator," she said. He went with her. She walked him to the lobby elevator, pressed 3, and when the doors opened, she said, "First right out of the elevator, follow the signs." He stepped in. The doors closed. She went straight to the nearest house phone and called Reeves. Male, approximately 35, 5'10", light jacket, gray right wrist bracelet that didn't come from registration. He's in the elevator heading to 3. He was doing a survey of the ER floor. "We have him." Reeves said, and she could hear something else in his voice, a compression, the sound of controlled urgency. Nora, listen to me carefully. I'm listening. We picked up communication overnight that changes the scope of what we're dealing with. The Friday visit isn't the primary target. She absorbed that. Then what is? The systems they've compromised in this building, the communications routing, the access controls, the emergency PA, they're not set up to manage a crowd or create a distraction. They're set up to isolate a section of the building and override the external communication system. He paused. Not to stop our person from arriving, to prevent anyone from calling out after something happens. She stood in the lobby corridor with the phone at her ear and the afternoon light coming through the glass at a low angle and the ordinary sounds of the hospital around her. They're not targeting the visit, she said. No. They're targeting the building. A section of it. We think the ER level specifically, based on the routing configuration. A beat. Based on what you told us about the secondary panel in your supply closet. She looked down the corridor toward the ER. How many people are in my department right now? She said, and it wasn't really a question. 31 patients, 16 staff. His voice was level in the way of someone keeping it level on purpose. We're not waiting until Friday. We're moving tonight, but I need you to do something first. Marcus? She said. Silence on the line. We don't have confirmation, Reeves said. You don't? I might. She thought about the 11:40 timestamp, about the apology in his face that hadn't been what she thought it was. Let me talk to him. Nora, not to confront him, not to tip anything, just to confirm. She kept her voice flat. I know how to have a conversation that isn't a conversation. A longer pause. You have 40 minutes, Reeves said. Then I'm pulling everyone in regardless. Don't go to the admin wing alone. I won't go to the admin wing, she said. She hung up and walked back to the ER. Denise was at the nursing station. Nora stopped beside her. Is Marcus still in the building? I had a patient records question for Hale's office. Denise checked the internal directory without looking up. He's in the first floor break room. Hale sent him on lunch late. Thanks. The first floor break room was a narrow space near the staff entrance. Microwave, table, 4 chairs, a window overlooking the parking structure. Marcus was alone, sitting with his phone face down on the table and a sandwich in front of him he hadn't touched. He looked up when she came in. The apology moved across his face like a reflex. Nora, hey, I actually wanted to say I'm sorry about Tuesday with Dr. Hale. He was pretty short with you, and I shouldn't have just... It's fine, she said, and sat down across from him. He relaxed slightly. That was what she needed. She talked about nothing for a minute. The shift, the volume, the Friday preparations. He responded in the way of someone who was grateful the conversation was about something ordinary. His hand stayed on the table. His sandwich stayed untouched. She watched his eyes when she mentioned the administrative corridor. No reaction. She mentioned Pollard's name, casually, in the context of facilities work orders for Friday's preparations. His right hand moved. Not much. He picked up his phone, turned it over, set it back down. The whole motion took under 2 seconds. I don't think I know anyone by that name, he said. Oh, he's on the facilities team. He's been coordinating the prep work. She kept her voice easy. I thought I saw you talking to him last week. Maybe in passing, Marcus said. I don't really interact with facilities much. She looked at him. He was 24 years old, and he was trying very hard, and the apology was always on his face, but today it was covering something else. Something that sat behind his eyes like a thing he'd swallowed and couldn't quite keep down. It's a stressful week, she said. Yeah. His voice was quiet. Yeah, it really is. She stood up. Enjoy your lunch, she said. She left the break room and walked to the stairwell and called Reeves before she'd reached the first landing. It's him, she said. I don't have hard confirmation, but it's him. He knew the name. He recognized it, and he tried to bury it, and he's not experienced enough to do it cleanly. A short pause. Okay, Reeves said. He's scared, she added. Whatever he got into, I don't think he understood what it was when he started. That doesn't change what he did. I know. She pushed through the stairwell door back onto the ER level. I know it doesn't. She made it 12 steps down the corridor before Denise appeared at the other end of it, moving faster than her usual pace. And the look on her face was the specific look of someone who had two things to say and didn't know which was worse. Nora. She was close now, lowering her voice. Garrett just pulled Hale into a closed meeting, admin wing, and there are two men downstairs at the main entrance. They're not staff, they're not patients, and they're asking for you by name. Nora stopped moving. By name, she said. By name. Denise searched her face. What is going on? Nora looked at the corridor ahead of her, then at the stairwell behind her, then at Denise. Those men downstairs, she said. Did they show ID? Security said federal. Don't let anyone tell them where I am until I call you. Don't tell Hale. Don't tell Garrett. Denise stared at her. Nora, I know how that sounds. I'll explain when I can. She put her hand briefly on Denise's arm. I need 3 minutes. She turned and walked fast toward the north end of the department, toward the supply closet with the secondary communications panel on the other side of its wall. Because if Reeves was moving tonight and federal personnel were already at the front entrance, then the timeline had just collapsed, and somebody in this building who wasn't Reeves had figured out that she was the reason their operation was 3 days ahead of where they'd planned. She reached for her phone to call Reeves's direct line. The screen lit up with an incoming call before she touched it. Not Reeves's number. A number she didn't recognize, local area code, and when she answered it, there was 2 seconds of silence before a voice said, Low, male, deliberate. We know about you. Step back from whatever you think you're doing, or the people in your department won't make it to Friday. She hung up. Not because she was frightened, perhaps. The fear was there, a cold, specific thing in her chest, but it wasn't running the show. She hung up because the call had given her 3 things she needed. Confirmation that they knew who she was, confirmation that they were watching the department in real time, and confirmation that whoever made that call believed a threat against her patients would stop her. They were wrong about the last part, but they didn't know that yet. She called Reeves's direct line. He picked up on the first ring. I just received a threat call, she said. Unknown local number, male voice, deliberate. He said they know about me and threatened the patients in my department. A half-second pause. When? 40 seconds ago. Are you still in the north corridor? Yes. Don't move. Federal team is coming through the main entrance now. That's the 2 men Denise told you about. They're ours. She could hear him moving, the sound of a room becoming active around him. Nora, this changes the operational posture. We're not waiting until tonight. We're executing now. How many of theirs are in the building? We have confirmed sightings of 3. There may be a 4th. The man you walked to the elevator yesterday. We lost him on the 3rd floor and haven't relocated him. She looked down the corridor. 31 patients, 16 staff. The supply closet 20 feet from where she was standing, the secondary communications panel behind its wall, and somewhere in this building a 4th person she couldn't account for. The panel, she said. If they activate it before your team gets to it, I have someone on the way to the supply closet right now. Do not open that door yourself. Understood. She kept her voice level. What do you need from me? Stay in the department. Keep your staff calm. If anything moves, anyone who doesn't belong, any alarm that doesn't match, you call me and you get your patients away from the north corridor. Away from the panel. Away from the panel. She ended the call and stood in the corridor for exactly 4 seconds, which was how long she allowed herself to process before shifting into the mode that didn't have a name, but that her body still remembered. The state of moving through a dangerous environment without broadcasting that you knew it was dangerous, because broadcasting it created panic, and panic got people hurt faster than anything the threat itself could do. She walked back onto the floor. Denise was at the nursing station. She looked at Nora with the carefully controlled expression of someone who had decided to trust a person they weren't sure they should trust. The federal agent's downstairs, Nora said quietly. They're going to come up. When they do, let them through. Don't announce them on the overhead. Nora, will you please? I need you to do 2 things. Move the patients in rooms 1 through 4 away from the north wall, repositioning for a test, equipment issue, whatever reason makes sense to the families. And if anyone comes through the staff entrance that you don't recognize, you call me before you call anyone else." Denise stared at her. "This is real," Nora said. "Not a drill. Not a theory. A beat." Denise nodded once, tight, controlled, the nod of someone who had decided. Nora moved to the first room. She spent 6 minutes repositioning 4 patients, 2 of whom required explanation, and 1 of whom was post-procedural and couldn't be moved without a proper equipment transfer that she handled herself because there wasn't time to wait for an orderly. She was professional and calm, and she didn't rush in any way that suggested urgency, because the patients were reading her the way patients always read the people taking care of them, looking for information in everything, especially in the things nobody said. She was finishing the transfer on patient 4 when she heard it. Not an alarm, not a voice, a sound that was too small for the building's ambient noise, a soft mechanical click from the direction of the supply closet, the kind of sound a latch made when it was opened carefully by someone who didn't want to be heard. She straightened up. She told the patient she'd be right back. She walked to the door of the room and looked down the north corridor. The supply closet door was open, not the way it had been left, not ajar, but fully open, and a figure was inside it with their back to her, crouched over the access panel at the base of the north wall. Not one of Reeves's people. Reeves's people would have announced themselves. Reeves's people would not be crouching. She called Reeves. He answered instantly. "Talk to me." "Someone is in the supply closet, at the panel right now." She heard him say something away from the phone. Short, clipped, directional. Then, "Our team is 40 seconds out. Can you see the panel from where you are?" "Yes." "Has he touched anything?" She looked. The figure had a device in his hand. Small, rectangular, the kind of thing that could interface with a secondary routing system if you'd spent time preparing the interface in advance. "He has a device," she said. "He's connecting it." "Nora, listen to me exactly. If he completes that connection before our team arrives, he can lock down your communications floor-wide and trigger a cascade through the emergency PA that will send everyone toward the exits," she said, "away from their stations, away from the patients, and clear a path to the patient we're protecting." She was already moving. She didn't run. Running in an ER was its own kind of alarm. It pulled eyes. It changed the room's temperature. It told 31 sick people that something was wrong before anyone had decided what to do about it. She walked fast, the way staff walked when there was a purpose but not a code. The figure in the closet heard her at 4 feet. He turned. It was the man from the elevator, the one she'd walked to the lobby yesterday, pointed at the 3rd floor button, and watched the doors close on. He was faster than she expected. He was on his feet before she'd closed the distance fully, and the device was still in his hand, and for a fraction of a second they were both reading the same situation and coming to the same conclusion. He moved first. He went for the panel. Not for her, for the panel, because completing the connection mattered more than dealing with a nurse, and that was a calculation she'd anticipated. She got her hand to his wrist before the device made contact with the port. His hand was stronger than it looked. She used that, let him pull, redirected the force lateral instead of back, and put his forearm against the supply closet shelving hard enough that he lost his grip on the device. It hit the floor. She kicked it into the corridor without looking. He recovered faster than she liked. He got an arm around her from behind, a controlling grip, not a choking one, which told her he'd been trained to restrain rather than injure, which also told her he didn't want the noise that injuring her would create. She drove her elbow back and down, got partial separation, and took 2 steps back into the corridor to break the confined space disadvantage. He came out of the closet after her and stopped. Because the 2 federal agents Denise had been told about were standing at the end of the corridor, and they were not displaying patience. The figure assessed the math in the half-second he had. Then he put his hands up. It wasn't over. She knew it wasn't over because Reeves had said 3 confirmed and possibly a 4th, and this was only 1, and the rest of the department was still running a normal Thursday afternoon around her. The agents had him in cuffs before she'd fully caught her breath. One of them, older, a woman with close-cropped hair and the specific kind of authority that didn't require volume, looked at Nora as they moved him down the corridor. "Slade," she said. "Yes." "Reeves wants you on comms, now." She picked the device up off the floor with a gloved hand she'd grabbed from the dispenser on the wall. Because even now, even in this, she thought about contamination protocol, about the patient in room 4 who was waiting for her to come back, and carried it to the nursing station. Denise had her back to the room. She was doing something at the medication log that didn't require the kind of stillness she was holding herself at. "Denise," Nora kept her voice low. "It's handled. One person. He's in custody." Denise turned around slowly. Her eyes went to Nora's left forearm, where a red mark was developing along the bone from the shelving impact. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." She wasn't performing toughness. It actually wasn't bad. She'd had worse from a patient seizing in restraints. "Is everyone okay on the floor?" "Nobody knows anything happened." Denise's voice was very controlled. "I told Mrs. Kessler in room 2 we were moving her for a ventilation check. She asked if she could get more Jell-O." Something in Nora loosened slightly. "Tell her yes." She got Reeves on the phone. "One in custody," she said. "Device secured. Panel is intact." "Good." He was clipped, moving. "We have a problem." She'd expected that sentence. "Garrett," he said. "He's not in the closed meeting with Hale. He left the admin wing 11 minutes ago, and we don't have eyes on him." Garrett, the security coordinator. The man who'd told a room full of hospital staff that the east entrance was operating on standard protocol and had paused 3 seconds too long outside the supply closet door. Not a facilitator, not someone passing information, the coordinator of the operation itself. "He knows we're moving," she said. "He knows, and he knows where the primary target is being staged." He paused. "The patient was moved to a pre-admission suite on the 2nd floor this morning. Controlled environment, fewer variables. If Garrett knows the location..." "Where on the 2nd floor?" A beat. "East corridor," Reeves said. "Suite 214. She was already moving toward the stairwell. "Nora, you have people 2 minutes out?" 90 seconds. "I'm 45. She pushed through the stairwell door and went up. The 2nd floor was quieter than the ER. Longer hallways, lower light, the specific acoustic of a floor designed for patient rest rather than acute intervention. She came through the stairwell door and oriented fast. East corridor was to her right. She could see the length of it from where she stood. Beige walls, equipment carts, numbered doors. Suite 214 was the 3rd door from the far end. The door to 214 was closed. 2 doors before it, a man in a gray suit was talking to one of the floor nurses. Relaxed body language, practiced ease. The nurse was nodding, a tablet in her hand, the expression of someone receiving information from someone credentialed to give it. "Garrett?" He was 30 feet from the room, and he was running interference, keeping the nurse occupied and oriented away from 214. Nora assessed the corridor in the 2 seconds she had before he looked up. She walked toward him, fast but not urgent. She let her face settle into the expression she'd been wearing for 4 years, the one that said competent, unremarkable, exactly where she was supposed to be. He saw her at 15 feet. His expression didn't change, but his body did. The faintest reorientation, the unconscious physics of a person deciding whether the new variable is a problem. She made it easy for him. She angled toward the nurse. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, and pulled the tablet gently from the nurse's hand as though checking a chart. "Restock request came up from the 2nd floor supply room. Can you get that moving before the shift change?" The nurse, young, compliant, grateful for clear direction, looked between Nora and Garrett and back again. "Sure, I was actually in the middle of explaining something to this nurse," Garrett said. His voice was even. His eyes were not. "It'll take her 2 minutes," Nora said. "She can come right back." She handed the tablet to the nurse, who took it and moved toward the supply room without fully registering that she'd been redirected by someone she probably didn't know well. Garrett and Nora were alone in the corridor. She had 30 feet between her and 214. He had 25. "You're Slade," he said. "ER nurse." "That's right." "You're on the wrong floor." "I got turned around," she said. "Big building." He looked at her with the particular attention of someone who had stopped performing casualness. His right hand moved toward his jacket, not quickly, not in a way that announced itself, just a small relocation of weight. She stepped into his space. It wasn't a trained combat move. It was something more basic, the simple act of closing distance before he'd decided to create it, which disrupted the geometry of what he was planning. He couldn't draw without contact if she was already that close, and contact was noise, and he didn't want noise. "You're going to want to step back," he said, quiet and deliberate. "You're going to want to tell me who has access to Suite 214 right now," she said, just as quiet. A beat. Something passed across his face, not surprise, more like a recalculation. "You're better than they told me," he said. "People usually are." She heard the stairwell door at the far end of the corridor open and close. She didn't look. She kept her eyes on his. He looked. And when his gaze broke to track whoever was coming, she moved. One step to the side and a hard grip on his right wrist with both hands, turning the arm at the angle that compromised the shoulder without requiring force she didn't have. He was bigger than her and he was trained, and if he'd had 4 seconds, he would have reversed it. He didn't have 4 seconds. Reeves came through the stairwell door at a controlled jog with 2 other people behind him, and Garrett was already losing the leverage contest when they arrived. It was over in 30 seconds. Not clean. Garrett got her shoulder with his free elbow before his arm was fully controlled, and she'd bitten the inside of her cheek at some point in the scramble and tasted blood. And one of Reeves's team took an elbow to the ear, getting the cuffs on. But it was over. Garrett on the floor, wrists secured, breathing hard. Reeves crouched beside him, looked at him without expression, then stood and looked at Nora. She was holding her shoulder. It wasn't serious. She knew serious. "Suite 214, she said. "Is the patient secure?" "Secure," Reeves said. He was looking at her arm. "You need to have that checked. I need to know if there are any others unaccounted for." He looked at Garrett on the floor, then back at her. "Pollard is in custody downstairs. The man from the supply closet is in custody. The man from Tuesday's east entrance, we had him detained in the parking structure 20 minutes ago." He paused. "Garrett makes 4. She lowered her arm carefully. "Marcus," she said, "taken into federal custody at 1:45. He paused. "Before you ask, he cooperated immediately. Told us everything he knew, which wasn't everything, which was by design. They kept him narrow. He accessed the terminal because someone told him it was a routine data pull for an administrative audit. By the time he understood what he'd actually done, they had enough on him to ensure his silence." She thought about the untouched sandwich, the apology that was always on his face. "He was scared," she said. "Yes, it doesn't erase it." "No," she agreed, "but it explains it." She looked down the corridor at Suite 214. The door was still closed. Somewhere behind it, a person with a classified medical history had spent the last 90 minutes unaware that the building around him had been the site of an active operation. She thought about what Reeves had told her in the stairwell 2 days ago. "Whatever your file says, I've seen your work." She thought about the Cora's extraction, about the decision she'd made under fire that everyone who wasn't there had misread, and the people who had been there had never publicly corrected. She thought about what it had cost her. Not just the career, but the version of herself she'd had to put somewhere she couldn't reach for 4 years. She'd reached for it anyway. Tuesday morning, in a north stairwell with bad coffee and a repositioned camera on her phone. She turned back to Reeves. "What happens now?" "The building goes to controlled access, federal jurisdiction from this point. The Friday visit proceeds on an adjusted protocol." He looked at her steadily. "You need to go back to your department." "I know. And you need to let a physician look at that shoulder." "I'll have Denise tape it." "Nora." "I'm fine." She moved past him toward the stairwell. "My patients have been alone for 11 minutes. She went back down. The ER was exactly as she'd left it, or close enough. Denise had handled it. Mrs. Kessler had her jello. The patient in room 4 was watching television with the resigned contentment of someone who'd given up asking how much longer. 2 new arrivals had come through the ambulance bay while she was upstairs, and one of the evening nurses had started the intake. She went to the sink in the supply room, the other supply room, the one that didn't have a federal investigation in it, and washed her hands and looked at her face in the small mirror above it. She looked like someone who'd been in a corridor fight and then washed her face. She looked tired. Her cheek was swelling slightly where she'd bitten it. She looked like herself. She went back to the floor. At 3:45, Dr. Hale appeared in the ER for the second time that day. He was not doing a floor walk. He was moving with a specific destination, which turned out to be Nora's position near the medication station, and the expression on his face was one she hadn't seen from him before. Not the dismissiveness she'd cataloged across 11 encounters, not the managed authority. Something rawer, something that might have been fear wearing the skin of indignation. "I need to know what you told them," he said. She looked up from the chart. "Excuse me?" "The federal agents, the ones who spent the last 40 minutes in my office going through my files." His voice was controlled, but only just. "They're saying this building has been the site of an active security breach and that certain staff members have been cooperating with federal investigators. I want to know who authorized this." She held the chart. "The people who authorized it would be the federal agents," she said. "Don't be clever with me." He took a step closer, dropping his voice. "I run this hospital. If there was a security issue that required federal response, I should have been informed immediately. Instead, I'm pulled out of a meeting to be told that my administrative assistant has been detained, that there are men in custody in my parking structure, and that a patient on my second floor has a security detail that nobody told me existed." He looked at her with something that had passed through indignation and was settling into something closer to desperation. "What did you tell them?" "I told them what I observed," she said. "Which was what exactly?" "A repositioned security camera, a credential irregularity at the east entrance, access patterns on restricted systems." She put the chart down. "Things I also told you. In person, in writing, multiple times. Things you told me to submit to facilities management." He stared at her. "I submitted them somewhere else instead," she said. Given the circumstances, that turned out to be the correct call. His face moved through several expressions in quick succession. Anger, and then something that might have been calculation, and then something that landed closer to the recognition that the ground had shifted in a way he couldn't reverse. "Who are you?" he said. It wasn't a challenge, it was an actual question. She picked up her chart. "I'm the nurse you told to stay in her lane," she said. "I just had a wider lane than you knew." She walked back to her patients. The rest of the afternoon moved in the way of things moving after pressure releases. Slightly unreal, slightly too quiet, every ordinary interaction carrying more weight than it usually did. She triaged, she charted. She talked to the family in room 7, who had been waiting since morning for an update that the attending physician had been too busy to deliver, and she delivered it herself as much as she was permitted to, and she sat with them for 4 minutes because they needed 4 minutes. At 5:20, Reeves appeared in the department, not as the man from the stairwell, differently, openly, walking onto the floor with his ID visible and his demeanor the kind that read as official without being threatening. Several of the staff looked at him. He looked at Nora. He waited until she reached him. "We need a formal statement," he said. "Tonight, if possible. Full account, the camera, the badge, the east entrance, all of it. Everything you observed and when." "I can do that after my shift." 7? 7, she said. He nodded. He looked at her shoulder, which she'd had Denise strap with a compression bandage under her scrub top, and he didn't say anything about it. "The patient in 214, she said. "He's okay?" "He doesn't know how close it was," Reeves said, which is probably for the best. "And the Friday visit?" "Goes forward. Adjusted security, real security this time." He paused. Garrett had been in position for 6 months, placed by the private contractor who won the hospital's security services contract 18 months ago. The contractor is under federal investigation as of 2 hours ago. She took that in. "Hale didn't know," she said. "Hale didn't know about the operation," Reeves said carefully. "What Hale knew about the contractor selection process is a different question, and not one I'm able to answer yet." That was a careful non-answer from a person who'd learned to be careful. She nodded. He left. At 6:15, she was at the end of her shift doing her notes when Denise sat down next to her. Just sat. No clipboard, no tablet, no administrative reason. Just sat. 11-year night shift ER nurse, Denise said. "I've seen a lot." "I know you have." I've never seen anyone move through a crisis the way you did today. She was looking at the counter in front of her, not at Nora. Like you'd done it before. Not this specifically, just crisis. In general. Nora didn't answer. I'm not asking, Denise said. I'm just saying I saw it. Nora finished the notation she was writing. Thank you, she said, for what you did today. Moving the patients, not panicking. I panicked internally. That's allowed. Denise stood up. Will things be normal tomorrow? Nora thought about Garrett in federal custody, about Marcus sitting somewhere answering questions about a data pull he hadn't understood, about Hale in his office with a new understanding of what the ground looked like under his feet. Closer to normal, she said. Probably. Denise made a sound that said that was the most she'd expected and went back to the desk. Nora finished her notes. She put on her jacket. She thought about the statement she'd be giving at 7, about how much of it was going to require her to account for things she'd done on instinct rather than authorization, decisions she'd made in corridors without anyone above her in the chain having approved them. She thought about the fact that every single one of those decisions had been correct. She was walking toward the exit when her phone buzzed. Not Reeves's number, not the number on the card, a number she recognized from a different context entirely, a prefix she knew, an extension she'd last seen on a communication 4 years ago when everything in her other life had been ending. She stopped in the middle of the hallway. She looked at the screen. She answered it. A voice she hadn't heard in 4 years said, Slade, this is Director Calloway. I think it's time we talked about your record. She stood in the middle of the hallway and didn't move. The building was doing what buildings did at shift change. People moving in both directions, carts rattling, the PA calling a name she didn't register. All of it at a remove, like sound coming through water, because the voice on the phone was a frequency she hadn't heard in 4 years, and her body was processing it the way it processed something that shouldn't exist in its current environment. Director Calloway, she said. You remember my voice, he said. Good. Saves time. She moved toward the wall, out of the foot traffic. How did you get this number? Reeves, he said. With your permission, technically, since he was operating under a directive I authorized 3 days ago when your name came up in the advance work. A pause. Not awkward, just the pause of a man who chose his words with the precision of someone who'd spent 40 years in rooms where the wrong word cost something. I owe you a conversation that should have happened a long time ago. The conversation can wait, she said. It's waited 4 years, Slade. Another few hours won't hurt it. His voice shifted slightly. Less formal, not warmer exactly, but more direct. What I'm telling you tonight won't change what happened today, but it will change what happens next, if you want it to. She looked at the exit at the end of the hallway. She thought about the statement she had to give Reeves at 7. She thought about her shoulder, which was starting to actually hurt now that the adrenaline had finished metabolizing. 7:30, she said, after I give the statement. I'll be there. She ended the call and finished walking to the exit. The statement took 80 minutes. She gave it to Reeves and a federal investigator named Toland, who asked good questions and didn't editorialize, which she respected. She walked through everything chronologically. The camera, the badge, the east entrance, the mechanical room, the contact in the stairwell, Pollard, Marcus, the elevator man, the supply closet, Garrett. Toland recorded it, confirmed times against the keycard logs, and noted 3 points where her observations had preceded any official detection by between 40 minutes and 18 hours. She didn't say that to make a point. She said it because Toland asked her specifically when she'd first noticed each anomaly, and she answered accurately. When they finished, Reeves walked her to a small conference room on the ground floor where a man in his late 60s was sitting at the table with a paper cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Director Alan Calloway looked like someone who had held authority for long enough that it had stopped being something he wore and had become something structural, built into the way he sat, the way he occupied a room. He was trim, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once and had settled into something more durable. He stood when she came in. Slade, he said. Director. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. Reeves closed the door and stayed standing near it. Calloway looked at her for a moment. Not appraising, not searching, more like confirming. "The Cora's extraction," he said. "November, 4 years ago. Forward Operating Base Linden. You were the senior medic on a 4-person evacuation team pulling 2 wounded operators under active contact." "I know what happened," she said. "I know you do. I'm telling you what I know, which turns out to be more than what was in your file." He wrapped both hands around the paper cup without lifting it. "The official record says the extraction deviated from protocol, that you made an unauthorized call to alter the route, resulting in a collision with a civilian vehicle that injured a local national and delayed the evacuation by 19 minutes. That's what the record says. What the record doesn't say," he continued, "is that the authorized route had been compromised 14 minutes before your team moved. There was intercept intelligence that didn't reach your team's briefing because of a communication failure 2 levels above you. You didn't know that because you weren't supposed to know it existed." He paused. "But you suspected it, because you'd watched that route for 6 hours and something in the vehicle pattern didn't match." She kept her face still. This was the part she'd never been able to prove. The part that had cost her the argument, and ultimately the career. "You altered the route on instinct," he said. "The collision was an accident. Wrong place, wrong speed, a civilian who came around a corner neither of you expected. But your call got your team through alive. The authorized route had an ambush position that would have killed all 4 of you within the first 200 meters. The room was quiet. "We know this," he said, "because the intercept intelligence was declassified 18 months ago as part of a broader operational review, and the analyst who processed the original intercept submitted a formal correction to the after-action record." He finally lifted the coffee cup. "It took us too long to get here. I'm aware of that." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me this in person?" she said. "Because the formal correction alone changes a file," he said. "It doesn't change what was done to you. And I was the director of the division that reviewed your separation. I signed off on it." He set the cup down. "I didn't have the full picture. That's an explanation, not an excuse." She sat with that. 4 years of carrying a record that said she'd failed under pressure, made a panicked call, cost time, and caused collateral harm. 4 years of that being the version of events that existed in any system anyone could access. 4 years of knowing what she'd actually seen and done, and having no mechanism to make anyone else's version match hers. She wasn't going to cry. That wasn't where she was. But she felt something shift. Not dramatically, not the way things shifted in moments she'd seen in movies, but the way structural things shifted when a load-bearing piece was removed. Slowly, with a low sound, the surrounding architecture settling into a new configuration. "What does the correction mean practically?" she said. "Your separation is reclassified. The official record reflects an honorable discharge with commendation rather than an administrative separation under performance review." He pulled a thin folder from under his arm. She hadn't noticed he'd been holding it, and placed it on the table. "There's a formal letter. Some paperwork that Reeves can walk you through." He paused. "And an offer, if you want it. Not from me directly, from the medical training division attached to the unit you supported. They've been rebuilding a civilian-military integration program for trauma response. They want someone who understands both environments." She looked at the folder. She didn't open it. "I have a job," she said. "I know." He wasn't pushing. "The offer doesn't expire." She picked up the folder. It was lighter than she expected something that significant to be. She stood up. "Director," she said, "the contractor that placed Garrett, Meridian Security Solutions. How long have they been operating inside civilian medical facilities?" He looked at her carefully. "That investigation is active." "I know it's active. I'm asking what you know." A beat. "Meridian has held contracts at 7 civilian facilities with classified adjacency in the past 3 years," he said. "Harlow General is the first where we have confirmed evidence of active placement of an operative." "The first where you caught it," she said. He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "The first where we caught it." She nodded. She put the folder under her arm. "I'll read this tonight," she said. "Thank you for coming in person." She shook his hand and left. The drive home felt longer than it was. She kept the radio off. The folder sat on the passenger seat, and she didn't look at it, but she was aware of it the whole way. The weight of a corrected record, which was different from the weight of an injustice, and different again from the weight of nothing. Something in between. A thing that mattered and couldn't fully undo what it was supposed to undo, and was still worth having. She got home at 9:40. She ate standing at the kitchen counter. She opened the folder. The letter was 2 pages. Official language, formal structure, the kind of prose produced by institutions that had been generating institutional prose for decades. But the substance was clear. Her record was corrected, her separation reclassified, her conduct during the chorus extraction formally noted as sound tactical judgment under compromised operational conditions. The second page had the offer: medical integration program, consulting capacity, her schedule, her terms. She read it twice. She put it on the table. She went to bed and slept 7 hours, which was more than she'd managed in 4 days. Friday arrived with the low gray sky still in place, the city of Caldwell doing what it did on Friday mornings. Moving, functional, unaware. She was at the hospital at 6:50. On time. The building looked the same from the outside, which still struck her as slightly wrong, the way places looked the same after significant things had happened inside them. She went in through the main entrance because the east entrance was operating under genuinely enhanced protocol now, and she didn't want to be in that corridor more than necessary. The ER floor was quiet in the early morning way. 2 overnight patients waiting on discharge. 1 new admission from a midnight ambulance run who was stable and sleeping. She did her handoff and checked her assignment and went to work. Denise was on again. She'd picked up the Friday shift, which she hadn't been scheduled for, and she didn't explain why, and Nora didn't ask. She understood why. Some things you stayed for. At 8:15, Reeves appeared on the floor again. This time he was with Toland and a woman Nora didn't recognize who had the bearing of someone senior, not military, not exactly federal, something in between. They came to Nora's station. "This is Deputy Director Marsh," Reeves said. "She's overseeing the Meridian investigation." Marsh was 50-something, direct in the way of someone who'd long since stopped having patience for indirection. "We need 20 minutes, she said to Nora. "Somewhere quiet." They used the same conference room on the ground floor. Toland had a tablet with him. Marsh sat across from Nora and put both forearms on the table like she was settling in for something real. "Garrett talked," she said. "All night. He's looking at federal charges under 3 separate statutes, and his attorney advised full cooperation, so we got full cooperation." She pulled the tablet toward herself and turned it so Nora could see the screen. "Meridian placed him in the Harlow General Security Contractor role 8 months ago, with the specific intent of identifying when the facility might be used for any classified medical adjacent activity. They've been doing this, systematic placement in civilian facilities, for a period we're still establishing, but our current estimate is closer to 5 years, not 3. Nora looked at the screen. Names, dates, facility locations. "Who's funding them?" she said. "That's what we're unraveling. Garrett knows his handler. His handler knows the next level. We're working up the chain." Marsh leaned back. "What I can tell you is that the access to the classified intake documentation, the information about the patient in 214, came from a source above the facility level. Garrett didn't get that from Marcus or from Pollard. He got it from whoever told him the patient was coming before the facility decision was finalized." "Someone above Harlow General," Nora said. "Someone with access to the pre-decisional patient transfer documentation," Marsh said, "which narrows it to a very short list." She looked at Nora steadily. "I'm telling you this because Reeves told me what you did this week, and because I think you deserve to understand the scope of what you walked into." A pause. "And because I want you to know that the connection you made between the camera displacement and the communications routing, that specific analytical leap, is the reason we got ahead of this instead of behind it." Nora looked at the table for a moment. "I was ignored for 3 years, she said, not bitterly, just as a fact she was placing on the table next to the other facts. "I know," Marsh said. "I submitted written documentation. I raised it verbally. I followed the process." "I know." Marsh's voice was even. "The process failed you. I'm not here to defend it." Nora looked up. "What happens to Hale?" she said. Marsh and Reeves exchanged a brief look. the kind that wasn't evasive so much as calibrated. Dr. Hale is currently cooperating with an administrative inquiry, Marsh said. He did not have foreknowledge of Meridian's operation. His involvement with the contractor selection was legal, if significantly influenced by financial incentives that are now under scrutiny. His consistent dismissal of your security concerns— She paused. That creates a specific kind of institutional liability that the hospital's board is going to have to address. Is that a yes or a no? It's a not my jurisdiction, Marsh said, and for the first time there was something that might have been dry humor in it. But the board has been briefed, and the board is not pleased. Nora nodded. She went back to work. The morning moved steadily. At 10:30, the patient transfer happened. The intelligence official in Suite 214 was moved out of the building through a secured exit that the regular staff had been quietly redirected away from. She watched it happen from the corridor window at the end of the second-floor hallway, because she'd been up there for a legitimate reason, a patient-family question that needed in-person explanation. And the window was there. A convoy of 3 vehicles, clean, fast, nothing dramatic, the kind of exit that looked like nothing if you didn't know what you were looking at. She went back downstairs. At 12:45, Dr. Hale arrived on the ER floor for the 3rd time in 2 days. But this time he wasn't coming to confront her. He was coming with 2 men from the hospital's administrative board. She recognized one of them, Board Chair Gerald Whitmore, who had been at the hospital's renovation ceremony 2 years ago and whose photograph was on the wall of the administrative wing. And they stopped at her station. Hale looked like a man who had been awake all night negotiating with the version of himself that had made a long sequence of decisions whose consequences he was only now fully accounting for. He looked reduced, not defeated. She wasn't going to assign him a dramatic fall when what he was actually experiencing was more mundane and in some ways worse, the slow arithmetic of realizing that arrogance has a bill, and the bill has arrived. Whitmore spoke. "Ms. Slade," he said, "on behalf of the board, I want to acknowledge that the concerns you raised, repeatedly, through proper channels, over an extended period, were not given the attention they deserved." She waited. "The board is conducting a full review of the institution's security protocols and the decision-making chain that resulted in your reports being dismissed." He paused. "We would like to meet with you formally next week, with legal counsel present, to discuss both the timeline of your concerns and an appropriate institutional response." She looked at Hale. He was looking at the counter in front of her. He looked like a man standing on ground that had stopped feeling solid. "I'll meet with the board," she said. "I'd like Denise Rafferty included in that meeting, given her role in the response on Thursday." Whitmore nodded. "Of course." Hale looked up. He opened his mouth, and she could see him assembling something. Not an apology exactly, or not just that, but whatever the version of an apology was for a person who'd spent 30 years not having to give them. "The reports you submitted," he said. "I should have read them." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "You should have." He nodded once and moved away. She turned back to her station. 2 minutes later, Denise materialized beside her. "Did I just see Whitmore on the ER floor?" she said. "You did." "Gerald Whitmore hasn't been on this floor since the renovation." "I know." Denise looked at the direction they'd gone. "Are you going to tell me what happened?" "Some of it," Nora said. "When I can." Denise absorbed this. "Are you okay?" Nora thought about the folder on her kitchen table, the corrected record, the shoulder strapped under her scrubs, the supply closet 20 feet away that would need to be cleaned out and restocked and returned to being a supply closet. The 4 years she'd spent in this building being invisible in a way that had turned out to be useful and was still, underneath that utility, something that had cost her something real. "Getting there," she said. Denise nodded. It was the right answer, and they both knew it. The afternoon brought what the afternoon usually brought, the cumulative weight of a hospital day, the individual urgencies that stacked without mercy, the management of pain and fear, and the specific logistics of bodies in crisis. She moved through it. She was good at it. She had always been good at it, which was the part that Hale had never been curious enough to investigate. How someone that competent had ended up in his ER, what they might have been before, what they might still be. At 4 o'clock, Reeves came back one more time. He found her in the corridor near the east wing and fell into step beside her without ceremony. Garrett's attorney has finalized the cooperation terms, he said. Full disclosure on Meridian's placement methodology and operational targets in exchange for consideration on sentencing. He's given us 4 additional facility names where he believes active operatives may be placed. 4, she said. We're moving on them simultaneously next week, before anyone in Meridian's chain can react to what happened here. He paused. Your documentation, the photographs, the access pattern logs, the timeline, it's been formally entered into the federal investigative record. It'll be cited in the warrant applications. She didn't say anything. It matters, he said. What you documented before any of us were in the building. It matters for the cases we're building, and it matters for the broader picture of what Meridian has been doing. He stopped walking. I want you to know that. She stopped too. I know, she said. Thank you for saying it. He nodded. He was about to turn away when she spoke again. The offer from the medical integration program, she said. The one Calloway mentioned. He looked at her. Tell them I'll think about it, she said. That's not a no, it's an actual answer. Something in his expression settled. I'll tell them, he said. He left. She was finishing her notes at the end of shift, the physical act of it, pen moving across paper in the deliberate way she'd always preferred to typing, the record being made in her own hand, when the call came in. Not her phone, the department phone at the nursing station, which Denise picked up, and then held out toward her with an expression Nora couldn't immediately read. It's for you, Denise said. He says he's from the Caldwell Courier. Nora looked at the phone. A reporter. Of course. The kind of institutional rupture that had happened at Harlow General in the past 48 hours didn't stay contained forever. Federal agents, detentions, a board chair on the ER floor, the hospital director looking like a man who'd lost something he hadn't known was at risk. Someone was going to ask questions. She took the phone. This is Slade. Ms. Slade, my name is Paul Hearn. I'm a reporter with the Courier. I've been covering the federal activity at Harlow General this week, and I've been given your name by 2 separate sources as someone with, I can't comment on an active federal investigation, she said. I understand. I'm actually not asking about the investigation specifically. I'm asking about the security concerns you raised prior to this week. The written reports, the formal submissions that were dismissed by hospital administration. A pause. I have copies of 3 of them. Submitted dates are on record. I wanted to give you the opportunity to speak to your own documentation before I publish. She stood at the nursing station in her faded blue scrubs with the pen still in her hand. 3 reports. Someone had pulled them from somewhere. Facilities management, the administrative archive, the compliance folder that she'd never heard back about. She thought about what it meant for those documents to exist in a reporter's hands. What the story looked like from the outside, a nurse who flagged security failures repeatedly, was dismissed repeatedly, and turned out to have been right. The institutional failure laid out in her own words and dates, existing in the public record. She thought about Hale, about the board meeting next week, about the 4 other facilities where Meridian might have people waiting. When are you publishing? She said. Monday morning, unless something changes. I'll call you back tonight, she said. Give me a number. He did. She wrote it down. She hung up and looked at the number on the paper for a long moment. Denise was watching her from across the station, not asking, just present. Nora put the paper in her pocket. She finished her notes. She put on her jacket. She picked up her bag. She thought about the folder on her kitchen table and the offer she'd told Reeves she'd think about, and the number in her pocket, and the 4 facilities that nobody had identified yet, where someone was watching camera angles and testing credential lag times and waiting. She was almost to the exit when the department phone rang again. Denise answered it. A beat. Nora. Her voice had changed. Nora turned. It's the board chair's office, Denise said slowly. They're saying the Monday meeting is being moved. She paused. They want to do it tomorrow, emergency session. And they're saying, she looked at the phone in her hand, then back at Nora. They're saying Dr. Hale has been asked to step down pending the review. Nora stood in the doorway of the ER that had been her floor for 4 years. Pending review means it's not final, she said. He declined, Denise said. He submitted his resignation an hour ago, effective immediately. The department was doing what it always did, moving, steady, the background hum of necessary work. Somewhere behind her, a monitor beeped. Someone's name was called on the PA. The east entrance was operational with new protocol, and the supply closet was a supply closet again, and suite 214 was empty and being prepared for a legitimate patient. She thought about 11 dismissals, about the compliance folder and the facilities management inbox, and the 12-degree camera displacement that nobody else had noticed. She thought about what it cost to be invisible for 4 years and what it turned out to be worth. Okay, she said. She walked out. The evening air was cold enough to see her breath. She stood outside the main entrance for a moment, just stood there, with the building behind her, and the parking lot in front, and the ordinary Friday evening city doing its ordinary things in every direction. Her phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't have stored. It took her 3 seconds to recognize the prefix. It was from Marcus. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix it. I'm sorry. She looked at the message for a long time. She didn't reply. She put her phone in her pocket and walked to her car, and she was almost there, almost at the driver's door, key in hand, when she noticed the envelope under her windshield wiper. No markings, no postage. Her name handwritten on the front in a script she didn't recognize. She stood in the parking lot with the cold air around her and looked at the envelope. Then she picked it up, turned it over, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, 3 lines, no letterhead, no signature. Meridian's funding source is not foreign, it is domestic, it is institutional. The 4 facilities Garrett named are not the end of the list. There are 11. You already know one of the names on it. She read the note 3 times. Not because the words were ambiguous, they weren't. She read it 3 times because the first time she was still registering what it was, and the second time she was mapping it against everything she knew, and the third time she was deciding what to do in the next 60 seconds. The handwriting was deliberate. Someone who'd taken time with it. The paper was standard. Nothing traceable in the stock itself. No fingerprints she'd be able to lift. No identifying marks. Whoever had left it recently, because her car had been in this spot since 6:50 that morning, and she'd walked past it twice during the day without noticing anything on the windshield. 11 facilities, domestic funding, institutional, and one name she already knew. She put the note back in the envelope. She took out her phone and called Reeves. He answered on the second ring. I'm in the parking structure, she said. Someone left a note on my car. I need you here in the next 10 minutes. Are you safe? She looked around the structure, the concrete columns, the low light, the handful of cars at this end of the lot, the exit ramp visible 40 feet away. Yes. 10 minutes, he said. She leaned against her car and waited. She didn't go back inside. She didn't call anyone else. She held the envelope and thought about the phrase you already know one of the names and ran the list of what she knew, what she'd actually confirmed versus what she suspected, versus what was inference stacked on inference. One name she already knew. She thought about Meridian Security Solutions, about the contract that had placed Garrett inside Harlow General 18 months ago, about Gerald Whitmore, board chair, whose photograph hung in the administrative wing and who had been at the renovation ceremony and who had been on the board during the contractor selection process. She thought about the 2 men she'd seen with Hale on Wednesday afternoon. Suits, private sector, the body language of a recent agreement. She'd read them as consultants. She'd never confirmed who they were. She thought about the way Calloway had said someone with access to the pre-decisional patient transfer documentation and then stopped. She was still thinking when Reeves came through the stairwell door at a controlled pace and crossed to her without making it look like a crossing. She handed him the envelope. He read the note once. His face didn't change the way civilian faces changed when they received significant information. It just got quieter, more contained, the way a room got quiet when something important was said in it. When did you find this? He said. 5 minutes before I called you. It was under the wiper. You didn't see anyone? I came straight to the car from the exit. Parking structure was empty at this end. He looked at the note again. 11. Garrett gave you 4, she said. Someone is telling us the list is longer and that we have a source inside our own process. He looked up. Or, he said carefully, Someone is trying to redirect the investigation. Is that what you think? He folded the note back into the envelope slowly. I think it's what I have to consider. Consider it and also pursue it, she said. Because if it's accurate and we don't move on it, whatever happened here this week happens 11 more times. He held the envelope. The name you'd already know, he said. Do you have a candidate? She looked at him. Whitmore, she said. Gerald Whitmore, board chair. He was on the board during the Meridian contract selection. He walked in here with Hale this afternoon like a man managing a problem, not like a man discovering one. Reeves was quiet. That's not evidence, he said. I know. It's an observation. She held his gaze. I'm telling you what I noticed. What you do with it is your job. He pocketed the envelope. Go home, he said. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's board meeting. Be there. I'll have a team looking at this overnight. She drove home on streets that were fully dark now. The city settled into its Friday night patterns. Restaurants lit up, foot traffic on the main commercial stretch. The ordinary texture of a place living its life. She ate again. She read the folder again, or parts of it. She didn't sleep immediately. She lay in the dark for an hour, running the notes 3 lines through her head, not anxiously, just the way her brain worked through problems when she gave it space and darkness and quiet. You already know one of the names. She woke at 6. The Saturday morning board meeting was called for 9, which was the kind of scheduling that told you everything about how seriously the board was taking the situation. Weekend sessions at Harlow General happened approximately never. She arrived at 8:50 in clothes that were not her scrubs for the first time in what felt like a long while. Dark trousers, a plain shirt, a jacket that covered the compression wrap still on her shoulder. She looked like herself. She felt like herself, which was a thing she hadn't said internally in some time, and which she noted without making too much of. Denise was in the lobby. You didn't have to come in, Nora said. You said you wanted me at the meeting. I did. I didn't mean this early. I'm always early, Denise said, which was true. They went up together. The boardroom was on the 3rd floor, adjacent to the administrative wing, a room she'd never been in. Long table, 12 chairs, the kind of institutional furnishing that was meant to communicate permanence. 6 board members were present when she arrived, Whitmore at the head of the table. Reeves was in the room, standing near the wall rather than seated, which was its own kind of statement. Toland was there. A woman Nora didn't recognize was seated to Whitmore's left with a laptop open and a legal pad beside it. Board counsel, she guessed. Whitmore greeted them with the collected manner of a man who had been doing this long enough to stay collected even when he wasn't. She watched him while the preliminary housekeeping happened, board members introduced, legal presence noted, recording confirmed. She watched his hands, his eyes, the specific quality of his attention when Reeves's name was mentioned. The meeting opened with Toland presenting a factual summary of the federal investigation, sanitized, appropriate for this context, covering the confirmed infiltration of the security contractor role, the compromise of hospital systems, the individuals in custody. When he reached the part about the classified patient intake documentation being accessed from an administrative terminal, Whitmore asked a question. The terminal in question, he said, was it in Hale's office? Administrative wing, 3rd floor, Toland said. The specific workstation is part of the ongoing investigation. But Hale's office is on this floor. Yes. Whitmore nodded slowly, in the manner of a man building a story he wanted the room to accept. Hale as the locus. Hale as the problem that had been identified and removed. The institution ready to move forward. Nora watched him build it. Then Reeves spoke. Mr. Whitmore, he said, I want to be transparent with this board. As of this morning, the federal investigation has expanded in scope. We are examining the Meridian Security Solutions contract selection process, specifically the decision-making chain that approved Meridian's bid 18 months ago and the financial relationships between board-level personnel and Meridian's parent holding company. The room went quiet in a specific way. Whitmore's face did not break. He was too practiced for that. But something in it recalibrated. The same thing she'd seen in Marcus's face when she'd said Pollard's name, that buried recognition surfacing before it could be suppressed. That's a serious allegation, Whitmore said. It's a serious investigation, Reeves said evenly. I want to be clear. No formal allegations have been made. This is disclosure of investigative scope. The board's legal counsel should be aware of this as the review proceeds. The attorney to Whitmore's left had already begun writing. Whitmore looked at Nora. She didn't look away. She'd spent 4 years looking away from rooms like this. From men in positions like his who'd decided the question of who mattered had already been settled. She wasn't doing that anymore. He looked back at Toland. I think the board needs a recess, he said, to consult with counsel. Of course, Toland said. The recess lasted 34 minutes. When they returned, Whitmore's attorney had arrived. A different person from the board's counsel, someone he'd called in specifically, which told the room everything it needed to know about why he'd needed the recess. Nora watched him for the rest of the meeting from across the table and thought about what it looked like when institutional power encountered a boundary it hadn't believed was real. Not dramatic, not operatic. Mostly it looked like a man trying to find the angle that protected him while the angles closed one by one. The board voted to commission an independent audit of the Meridian contract selection. Unanimous. Even Whitmore voted for it, which was either a calculated move or the action of a man who understood that opposing it would be worse than submitting to it. She couldn't tell which, and she wasn't sure it mattered. What mattered was that it was on the record. After the meeting, as people were moving toward the door, one of the board members, a woman named Tran, who had said almost nothing during the session but had taken more notes than anyone else, stopped beside Nora. I want you to know, she said quietly, that I requested your submission files 2 weeks ago as part of a general review I was doing of administrative response protocols. Nora looked at her. Before any of this, Tran continued, I was looking at response times and escalation patterns across departments. Your files came up as an anomaly, not because of what they contained, but because of what happened to them. 3 substantive security assessments with no documented response. She paused. I flagged it to Whitmore, and he told me it had been addressed internally. It hadn't, Nora said. I know that now. Tran held her gaze. I should have pushed harder when he said that. I didn't. I'm sorry. It was the second apology in 2 days from someone who probably didn't apologize easily. She accepted it the same way she'd accepted Calloway's. Not with dismissal, not with performed forgiveness, but with the plain recognition that an apology was being offered sincerely and deserved a sincere response. Thank you for telling me, she said. She left the boardroom. The investigation moved fast after that in the way that investigations moved fast when they had enough structure to run on, which was to say, not dramatically, but with the kind of institutional momentum that was actually harder to stop than anything more visible. The Meridian audit results came back in 11 days. Nora knew this because Reeves called her. The results were not good for Whitmore. The contract selection had involved a financial relationship between Whitmore and Meridian's parent holding company, Vantier Group, that predated the bid by 14 months. Not a direct payment. A series of consulting arrangements through a private LLC that Whitmore had a passive interest in, structured in a way that would have looked unremarkable to anyone who wasn't looking specifically for it. Someone had been looking specifically for it. The note on her windshield, it turned out, had come from inside the federal investigative process itself. A mid-level analyst who had found the Vantier connection 2 days before Garrett's arrest and had gone around his chain of command because he wasn't certain his chain of command was clean. He'd identified Nora from the advance team's documentation as someone who could be trusted with a piece of information that needed to move without going through official channels. She thought about that for a while, about the courage of passing a note, about how the same instinct that made her photograph a badge in a hospital corridor had made him put a piece of paper under a windshield wiper in a parking structure. The world was full of people noticing things and trying to figure out how to say so. Whitmore resigned from the board 22 days after the emergency session. No announcement, no press conference, a letter delivered to the remaining board members, and a brief statement from the board's new communications officer that referenced his decision to step down to address personal matters. The Caldwell Courier ran a piece that was considerably more specific, citing the federal audit and the financial relationship with Vantier Group. Paul Hearn's byline was on it. He'd been thorough. He'd gotten the timing right. Nora had spoken to him twice, once the night she'd taken his number, once after the audit results were formalized. She'd told him what she could tell him, which was the timeline of her own documentation and the institutional response to it. She hadn't told him anything covered by the federal investigation. He'd been professional about the distinction, which she'd respected. The Courier piece ran under a headline that she saw on her phone while she was eating breakfast on a Tuesday morning. Security failures at Harlow General, a nurse's 3-year warning. She read the first 3 paragraphs, set her phone down, and finished her coffee. It was accurate. That was what mattered. The record was accurate now. Garrett was charged under 2 federal statutes: unauthorized access to classified systems and conspiracy to commit acts endangering national security. His cooperation agreement reduced his sentencing exposure, but did not eliminate it. He pled guilty 8 weeks after his arrest. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following spring. The 3 other men, the one from the elevator, the one from the east entrance, the one Reeves had taken in the parking structure, were charged as co-conspirators. All 3 pled guilty within 6 weeks. Pollard pled guilty to unauthorized access to a federal computer system and received a suspended sentence in exchange for full cooperation and testimony. Marcus pled guilty to 1 count of unauthorized access and was sentenced to 18 months probation, community service, and a permanent bar from employment in any role with access to classified or sensitive federal systems. He was 24 years old. She thought about that sometimes, about the things people did when they didn't understand what they were part of, and about the fact that not understanding didn't make the thing undone. He had a long time to live with it. She hoped he did something worth living with. The Van Tier Group investigation produced 2 additional indictments, executives at the parent company level, neither of whom she knew by name. The 11 facility list from the note was confirmed at 9, the other 2 having never progressed beyond the placement stage. Federal operations at the 9 facilities happened over a 3-week period. She read about 2 of them in news coverage that was deliberately vague. She knew what vague coverage of that type meant. Whitmore was ultimately indicted 10 weeks after his resignation. 1 count of federal contracting fraud, 1 count of conspiracy. His attorney issued a statement saying he would fight the charges. His attorney also filed a motion to suppress evidence derived from the audit. The motion was denied. She didn't follow the legal proceedings closely after that. She knew enough to know that the machinery was moving, and that the machinery, once moving with sufficient documentation, tended to complete its cycle. It wasn't satisfying in the way that things were satisfying in stories. It was slower, more administrative, punctuated by delays in filings and procedural maneuvers that made the whole thing feel less like justice and more like accounting. But accounting was what prevented the next meridian. She had made her peace with that. The board meeting that formalized the institutional response to her filed reports happened 6 weeks after the emergency session. The independent audit of administrative response protocols, the one Tran had been conducting before any of this, was completed and presented to the full board. It documented in precise institutional language that 3 security assessments submitted by nursing staff had been dismissed without documentation of review, in violation of the hospital's own safety reporting protocol. The board voted to implement a new reporting structure, direct line from any clinical staff member to a newly created patient safety and security officer position, bypassing the traditional administrative chain for security-specific concerns. Mandatory review timelines. Documented response requirements. They offered Nora the position. She thought about it for 4 days, which was longer than she'd expected to think about it and shorter than the decision deserved. She said no. Not because she didn't want the work, not because she didn't think it mattered, but because the position was administrative, and administrative meant offices and meetings, and the slow institutional work of changing processes from the inside. And she had spent 4 years understanding that she was not built for invisible influence of that particular kind. The invisible influence she was built for happened in corridors and supply closets and parking structures with bad lighting. She recommended Denise for the position instead. Denise accepted it after exactly 1 day of deliberation, which was the most efficient decision-making Nora had ever seen her perform, which meant she'd already been thinking about it before she was asked. 3 weeks after that, Nora called the number attached to the medical integration program. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. She asked specific questions and got specific answers, and at the end of it, she had a clear picture of what the work was, and what it required, and what it would mean for her schedule at Harlow General, because she wasn't leaving Harlow General. That was not under negotiation. The program accepted a consulting arrangement, 2 days a month. She would work with trauma medics transitioning from military to civilian care environments, teaching them the specific translation that nobody had taught her, the one she'd had to figure out alone over 4 years of Tuesday shifts and dismissed reports and learning to be invisible in a way that didn't consume her. She started in February. The first session was in a conference room in a federal medical training facility 40 miles from Caldwell. 8 people around a table, former military medics in various stages of transition, some recently separated, some who'd been in civilian roles for a year or two and were still finding the language for what they'd lost and what they'd carried into the new context. She didn't open with her own story. She never did that. It felt like claiming authority from biography rather than earning it in the room, and she'd been around enough rooms to know the difference. She opened with a question. "What's the thing you notice that nobody else does?" Silence for a moment. Then a woman near the end of the table. She'd done 2 tours as a combat medic before moving into civilian ER work in a mid-sized city in the Midwest, said, "Everything." "Be specific," Nora said, and the room opened up. She drove back to Caldwell that evening with the windows down despite the cold because she needed the air. She thought about the woman at the end of the table and the specific quality of exhaustion that came from spending years noticing everything and having nowhere to put it. She recognized that exhaustion precisely. She'd been living in it. The difference, she was starting to understand, was not in the noticing. The noticing was just what their brains did, trained into them, structural, not a choice any more than breathing was a choice. The difference was in whether the noticing had somewhere to go, whether there was a system that received it, a process that used it, a person on the other end of the report who read it. She had spent 4 years submitting her noticing into a void, and she had noticed anyway, because stopping would have required dismantling something fundamental, and she'd already dismantled enough. She thought about what it would mean for those 8 people in that room to find a place that received what they saw, to stop having to choose between suppressing their training and spending it on a system that threw it away. She was going to spend some time on that problem. Back at Harlow General, the spring came in the way Caldwell's spring came, reluctantly, in stages, the gray sky giving way to something less committed to gray. The ER floor returned to its rhythms, which were never actually rhythms so much as patterns, interrupted constantly by the specific emergencies of specific people on specific days. She moved through it the way she'd always moved through it. But something was different, and she knew what it was. She wasn't invisible anymore. And not because she'd done anything differently in the hallways or at the nursing station or in the supply closet that was now just a supply closet again. She was the same person doing the same job. The difference was in what people brought to looking at her. Denise, from her new office on the administrative wing, passed through the ER 3 times a week and always found a moment to check in, not performatively, not in the way of someone who'd been given a role and was practicing the role, but in the way of someone who'd always been paying attention and now had a mechanism for doing something with it. The newer nurses, there were 4 who'd joined the ER team in the fall rotation, had clearly heard something. She didn't know exactly what, because the story that circulated in institutions was never the whole story and never the accurate story, just the shape of it distorted by transmission. But they looked at her with a specific kind of attention, not deference. She didn't want deference. More like orientation. The way you looked at something you were trying to take a bearing from. She was careful about that. The last thing she wanted was to become a legend in the building, because legends were static, and she was not static, and the work was not static. Legends were also, in her experience, a way of making someone exceptional, so you didn't have to think about what the ordinary systems should have been doing all along. She was not exceptional. She was trained. Those were different things, and the difference mattered. On a Wednesday afternoon in late April, a young nurse named Bex, 26, 3 months into her first ER posting, earnest in the way of someone who hadn't yet learned that earnestness was a liability in some institutions and an asset in others, stopped her in the corridor with a question. "I noticed something," Bex said, and then stopped as if testing whether that sentence was allowed. "Tell me," Nora said. "The keycard log for the pharmaceutical storage room." The access times are off. Yes, someone's accessing it at 3 a.m. twice this week, and the user ID is a code that's supposed to belong to a staff member who's been on medical leave for 2 months. Nora looked at her. You checked that against the leave records. I keep a note of who's out, Beck said, slightly defensive, as if she expected to be told that was excessive. That's good, Nora said. Show me the log. They went to the nursing station. Bex pulled it up. It was exactly what she'd described. The timestamps, the user ID, the discrepancy, clear, not ambiguous. Who did you report it to? Nora asked. Nobody yet. I wasn't sure if I was overreading it. Nora looked at the screen, then at Bex. You're not overreading it, she said. We're going to report it right now, and I'm going to show you exactly what the documentation should look like. And then we're going to follow up until we get a response. She paused. And if we don't get a response, we escalate. That's how this works now. Bex looked at her with that orientation-seeking attention. What if they dismiss it? She said. Nora thought about 3 reports going into a compliance folder she never heard back about. About a security camera displaced 12 degrees in a corridor she'd walked 400 times. About an envelope on a windshield in a cold parking structure, and a 3-line note from a man who didn't know her but had trusted her to do something with what he knew. You document that they dismissed it, she said, and you keep going. They documented it together at the nursing station, and the response came back, not in weeks, not buried in a facilities management queue, but in 40 minutes from Denise's office, acknowledging receipt and opening a review. It turned out to be a system error. The user ID had been incorrectly maintained in the access log database when the staff member went on leave. The error was corrected within the day. Not a threat, not a conspiracy, just a thing that could have been missed and wasn't. That was most of what noticing was in the end. 95% of what she caught across 4 years had been exactly that. Administrative errors, equipment issues, protocol gaps that were inconvenient but not dangerous. The other 5% had mattered enormously. The problem was you couldn't know which category you were in until you looked. So you looked. Always. That was the job. She finished her shift at 7, changed, walked to her car in the evening light that was longer now, the sky holding color later into the day. She sat for a moment with the window down and the parking structure around her and the folder in her bag. She carried the corrected record with her sometimes, not to read it, just to have it nearby. And she thought about what it meant to be in the right place doing the right work. Not a resolution. Not an ending with clean edges and everything settled. Whitmore's trial was 6 months away. The Vantier investigation was still open. Marcus was 3 months into his probation. The medical integration program had its next session in 2 weeks, and she had a woman named Adrienne signed up who'd been in combat medicine for 9 years and was now working night shifts in a children's hospital, and said in her intake form that she felt like she was disappearing. Nora knew exactly what disappearing felt like from the inside. She was going to help with that. She started the car. There was a version of this story that ended with a ceremony, a commendation, a handshake in a formal room, her name in someone's prepared remarks. That had happened more or less in the practical form of a corrected record and a federal letter and a board meeting where people who had dismissed her sat and listened. She wasn't dismissing what that meant. It meant something real. But the actual moment, the one that felt like an ending and a beginning at the same time, hadn't been in a conference room. It had been in a nursing station with a 26-year-old woman saying, I noticed something in the tentative way of someone who had been taught by every institution she'd passed through so far to preemptively apologize for her own attention. And Nora had said, tell me. 2 words. The ones nobody had said to her for 4 years. The ones that cost nothing and required no commendation and no ceremony and no corrected paperwork. Just the willingness to believe that the person standing in front of you, holding an observation they'd been carrying carefully, had something worth hearing. That was what had been missing. Not a system, not a protocol, not a policy memo. Just someone willing to treat another person's noticing as a starting point rather than an inconvenience. She pulled out of the parking structure into the April evening. Caldwell moved around her. Ordinary, unheroic. A mid-sized city between things, neither struggling nor thriving, doing its best the way places did their best. She drove through it without the radio on, which was how she thought best. And she thought about the 8 people in that training room and the woman who'd said everything and the long work of building the kind of environments where everything had somewhere to go. She thought about what it had taken to be invisible for 4 years and still be right. She thought about the fact that being right alone wasn't enough. That being right required being heard, and being heard required systems and people and an institution willing to receive what you saw. And building that was slower and less satisfying than any single moment of recognition, and it was the only work that actually lasted. She thought about Bex at the nursing station, documenting carefully, learning that her attention was an asset rather than an eccentricity. She thought about that for a long time. Then she drove home through the April light, and the city moved past her windows, and she was tired in the good way, the way of a person who had done actual work. And she was already thinking about tomorrow, and the week after, and the session in 2 weeks, and the long, ordinary, difficult, necessary work of making sure that the next person who noticed something had somewhere to put it. The most dangerous thing about the people nobody sees isn't what they carry. It's what happens when they finally decide to use it.